Project analysis. This is the second step in the initiation phase. This is about reviewing all the project documents. This is your first task as a project manager. You've just been assigned as a project manager, so you need to become familiar with the project. You have to have a good understanding of the design, the logic, approach, and challenges. To do that, you need to review all the project information that is available to you. You have to look at the project concept, the project analysis, the project logical framework or the results framework. You look at information on the project proposal and also information on project stakeholders. When you look at the analysis of this information, you need to look at these factors. Look at the project constraints and dependencies. That means that if there are going to be any limits that are imposed on the project or dependencies from external projects or organizations that need to deliver or do something that will be dependent on the project. Also look at the project approach. That means that the way the project was designed. Look at assumptions and risks that were identified at the beginning of the project. Also, you need to look at who are the beneficiaries and the project team requirements. When you look at the project constraints, we need to have an understanding of what are the constraints regarding the scope, the schedule, the budget, and even quality. Every project will have the specific definitions in terms of what are those constraints. It could be that there is a specific time in which you need to start or end the budget. You know you have a specific constraints on how you're going to use the funds of the project. So there may be some restrictions regarding the use of specific accounts, and that depends on the type of contract the project has with the donor. You also need to look at the project approach, looking at how the project was designed. What is the intervention logic? Look at the problem tree, where they identify the problem and the cause and effect elements that decide how the project was designed. Look at the objective tree for the ends and means, meaning what are the elements that need to happen in order to achieve the specific results of the project. Also look in this area, maybe the areas that the project decided not to include in the design. This is important because they will provide you some additional information about some of the logics and decisions made during the design of the project. On the LogFrame, you're going to have more information. That's where you'll have information about the impact, the final goal of the project, the outcomes, the outputs, and all the activities or inputs that were designed in order to produce those goals. Also become familiar on the project indicators, the means of verification and assumptions that were identified at the moment the project was designed. In the project assumptions and risks, you also need to look at what are the most important assumptions and make sure that to ask yourself if any of these assumptions have changed. The same thing with the risk. What are the most critical risks that are in the project and whether or not some of these risks are still relevant. You need to look at those risks or assumptions that will have a high impact or have a high probability in the project that will cause an impact. So make sure that you're familiar, that you have that information, because you will be able to then use that information in the planning phase when you're planning your process to manage risks. Then you have to review and become familiar with all information available on the stakeholders. So you have to have an understanding of who are the project stakeholders, and it could be internal stakeholders, the units or people within the organization, and external stakeholders, whether there's government institutions, whether they are partners or other NGOs or other organizations that are going to be impacted by the project. Also, become familiar on the information that you have on beneficiaries in terms of what are the expectations, support, their interest and influence on the project. Finally, you have to become familiar with all information that is provided to you regarding the project team in terms of what type of skills are needed, experience and knowledge. Also, make sure that you have information about their availability or location. During the design and the proposal of the project, there be a selection of key individuals that were appointed or selected to be part of the project, but between the process of approval of the project and the moment you need to start implementing the project, there could have been a lot of time, and some of those people may not be available. So it's important to make sure that you still have the team that was initially proposed during the project design. Also, make sure that you have a good understanding if there are any specific roles, responsibilities, and the process of supervision for the project.